Welcome everybody. This is the second half of the the third part of the second day's program of the national seminar. Just to recap, yesterday we had the plenary, and then we had 10 discussions on various themes. So कल जो है हमने पहले एक सभा किया और उसके बाद 10 अलग-अलग मुद्दों पे चर्चाएं हुई। फिर आज सुबह से जो है उन जो मुद्दे हैं उनमें जो निकल के आए हैं उन सत्रों में उसकी प्रस्तुतिकरण हुए हैं और एक पैनल डिस्कशन जो है उसके साथ किया गया है। और अभी हम उस सत्र के तीसरे पैनल डिस्कशन पे है और लास्ट जो दिन है जो कल है, कल ये कार्यक्रम और आगे चलेगा कि आगे हम सामाजिक अंकेक्षण और सोशल अकाउंटेबिलिटी पे क्या काम आगे और क्या प्लानिंग कर सकते हैं उसके ऊपर रहेगा। So we are now starting the session of today, the third session. The first two sessions basically had a debrief of some of the other themes that were discussed yesterday. So today's the session that is starting now would be on health, education and urban development. And we have another half day tomorrow, and be sure to join us, and welcoming you all as on behalf of all the organizers. So let us start with the session. So I request Keshav Desiraju ji, who is the former Secretary Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, to please moderate the session. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you. Thank you very much to the organizers for asking me to this panel discussion, and my greetings to everyone who is present. Now, my understanding is that there are 4 groups that will make presentations to start with, and then we have comments by 4 invited experts who will be discussants. So I'm not sure in what order the 4 groups are to be called, but if we could have maybe Sulakshana, you or Anandita, someone could pass the mic or give the floor to the first group, and if the group could introduce itself and make a presentation, trying to stay within the time limit of 8 minutes. If all of us stick to our times, if the presenters and discussants stick to their times, which I will mention, then there will be a good half an hour at least for discussion amongst all the participants, which I think is something we all want. So if I could request the first group that is making a presentation to please do so.
We can do health, followed by education, followed by
whichever it is, the 1 or 2 groups which have worked on health, if they could please take the mic. Yeah.
Thank you, and I think we have around 8 minutes, so please let me know when I'm
So you're fine. So Sulakshana, you have 8 minutes. You're good to go.
Yeah, thank you. I'll just share the screen. So कल जो I'll speak in Hindi mainly because the presentation is in English. जी. So कल जो हमारा सत्र हुआ था स्वास्थ्य के ऊपर जो पब्लिक हेल्थ रिसर्च नेटवर्क ने को ऑर्गेनाइज किया, बहुत रिच डिस्कशन हुए और हमने 2 सत्र उसके तहत थे जिसमें प्रस्तुतिकरण थी और फिर एक पैनल डिस्कशन था। तो उसमें बहुत रेंज ऑफ एक्सपीरियंसेस अलग-अलग राज्यों से एंड इंक्लूडिंग मतलब जो सरकारी योजनाएं हैं जैसे नेशनल हेल्थ मिशन के तहत जो कम्युनिटी मॉनिटरिंग के इनिशिएटिव्स है, फिर सिविल सोसाइटी के द्वारा जो राइट टू हेल्थ केयर इनिशिएटिव्स है, इस तरह के इंक्लूडिंग health watch, social audits, death audits, and also ways of जैसे छत्तीसगढ़ में था कि जो NHM के तहत ही एक तरह से जो सामुदायिक निगरानी को को किया गया। एंड ये साथ में आपको दिखेगा कई अलग अलग संस्थाएं संगठन इस सेशन में हमारे साथ थे। करीब 40 और लोग हमारे साथ जुड़े थे और फेसबुक में अभी तक 1100 से ज्यादा व्यूज हो गए हैं। सो मैं शुरू करूंगी कि जो प्रस्तुतिकरण हुई है, जो सबने अपना अपना अनुभव अपने अपने काम के बारे में अपना अनुभव बांटा, तो उसमें ये क्या क्या हमें समझ में आया। सबसे पहले ये समझ में आया कि जो स्वास्थ्य का क्षेत्र है वो काफी मतलब जटिल है और या जटिल समझा जाता है, और एक तरह से कई बार हमको लगता है कि ये डॉक्टरी लोगों का चीज है, और और कई बार उन चीजों को की निगरानी करना कि भाई कोई मरीज गया है, उसके साथ किस तरह का व्यवहार हो रहा है, या जो डॉक्टर उससे सही से उसका इलाज कर रहा है कि नहीं, एक आम व्यक्ति के लिए थोड़ा मुश्किल हो जाता है। तो कई इस तरह के कॉम्प्लेक्सिटीज है, जटिलताएं हैं स्वास्थ्य के क्षेत्र में, जिसको हमें समझना चाहिए और उसका निपटारा वी हैव टू रिस्पॉन्ड टू दैट, और उसको सुलझाने की जरूरत है। और उसी के उसमें जो है उसी के कड़ी में जो समुदाय स्तर की तकनीकी समझ और जिम्मेदारी स्किल्स, ताकि समुदाय मिलके इन चीजों को जो अलग अलग प्रक्रियाएं हैं, अलग अलग चीजें जो हम देखते हैं स्वास्थ्य के क्षेत्र में, उन चीजों को सहजता से हम बता पाए, और उसको मतलब वो सहज चीजें हैं जो कि लोगों के लिए, और मतलब वो जानबूझ के कई चीजें बहुत जटिल और एकेडमिक और बनाया गया है ताकि लोग उन चीजों को नहीं समझ पाए, आम जनता उन चीजों को नहीं समझ पाए। और हम सबकी ये जिम्मेदारी हमने सोचा उस समय, कल जो हमने चर्चा की कि उन जटिलताओं को और सरल करके चीजों को रखने की जरूरत है। और साथ में मुझे लगता है ये चीज भी कई बाकी सत्र में भी निकल के आई है, जो पंचायती राज जो संस्थाएं हैं, तो उनकी भागीदारी उसमें बहुत जरूरी रहती है, और खासतौर पे ग्राम सभा की। और इस तरह का अगर सामुदायिक स्तर पे निगरानी और सामाजिक अंकेक्षण हो रही है, उसकी फिर प्रस्तुतिकरण, जनसंवाद, जन सुनवाई के द्वारा किया जाता है। और एक बहुत बहुत कठिन एक चीज होती है कि इस चीज का फॉलो अप करना, कि कोई निर्णय लिया गया उसमें और उसको फिर सरकार आगे उसका उस निर्णय के ऊपर वो चल पा रही है कि नहीं। तो उसमें कई हमको कल अनुभव ये भी निकल के आए कि वो चीजें मॉनिटर करना भी बहुत मुश्किल समुदाय के लिए हो जाता है। और साथ में जो हमारे जो जमीनी स्तर के मुद्दे तो फिर भी सुलझ जाते हैं, लेकिन जो संस्थागत चीजें हैं या नीतिगत चीजें हैं, उन चीजों को सुलझाना, उसके ऊपर हमारी मांगे रखना, वो एक हमेशा चैलेंज रहता है। और एक जब हम सामाजिक अंकेक्षण कर रहे हैं, तो उसमें स्वास्थ्य कार्यकर्ताओं का जो मुद्दा है और मरीजों या आम जनता समुदाय का जो मुद्दा है, उन दोनों मुद्दों को, उन दोनों की समस्या को एक साथ करके देखने की जरूरत है। और साथ में जो अलग अलग समुदाय हैं, जो ज्यादा वंचित समुदाय हैं या जिनके साथ भेदभाव होता है, उनको उन समुदायों को इन प्रक्रिया के साथ जोड़ने की बहुत जरूरत है, उन मुद्दों को इन प्रक्रिया में आने की बहुत जरूरत है। तो सरकार की तरफ से जो हमको दिक्कतें आती है, एक तो है कि मतलब इवन अगर वो कई अनुभव ऐसे थे जो सरकार के द्वारा ही फंड किए जाते हैं, लेकिन फिर भी उसके बावजूद भी जो सरकार की अपनी उसमें एक ओनरशिप है, वो नहीं दिखती है। और कई बार जो है हमारे जो भी समस्याएं बताई जाती है, तो वो चीज उन चीजों को गंभीरता से सरकार द्वारा नहीं लिया जाता। तो इसलिए इवन सरकार के अंदर ही इस तरह की ऑडिटिंग होना बहुत जरूरी है, और किसकी क्या जिम्मेदारी है खासतौर पे इस क्षेत्र में, वो भी क्लियर करने की जरूरत है। और जो कॉन्फ्लिक्ट ऑफ इंटरेस्ट है, जो भेद जो मतलब कोई मतलब जो व्यक्ति जो कोई नीति बना रहा है या कोई सेवा दे रहा है, और वो जैसे कोई जांच करना हो एंड आपका किसी डॉक्टर ने कुछ कर दिया है और आप उसकी जांच करने जा रहे हो, और उसी के समुदाय के मतलब वो दूसरे डॉक्टर ही उनकी जांच करने जा रहे हैं, तो वो ऑब्वियसली ये सोचेंगे कि हम जो है हम क्यों अपने साथी डॉक्टर के बारे में गलत बोले। तो वो कॉन्फ्लिक्ट ऑफ इंटरेस्ट, वो चीजें देखने की जरूरत है कि इंक्वायरी वगैरह कौन कर रहा है, और उसमें इन चीजों को समझने की जरूरत है। एंड और इसके साथ भी मैंने डॉक्टर का उदाहरण दिया, लेकिन जो एक हेल्थ सिस्टम का जो स्वास्थ्य तंत्र की जिम्मेदारी है और व्यक्तिगत जिम्मेदारी है, उनको थोड़ा हमको बैलेंस करने की जरूरत है। कई बार हमने ये देखा है क्योंकि जो तंत्र की जो कमियां हैं, वो चीजें उनकी वजह से जो है कई बार स्वास्थ्य कार्यकर्ता या स्वास्थ्य सेवाओं में कमी होती है, तो इसको हमको थोड़ा देखने की जरूरत है। और साथ में हमने कल ये भी डिस्कस किया कि अभी सोशल ऑडिट्स और सामाजिक सोशल अकाउंटेबिलिटी कई ऐसे अंतर्राष्ट्रीय संस्थाओं के लिए एक बज़वर्ड भी बन गया है, और हमें थोड़ा ध्यान देना चाहिए कि किस तरह के उसके नाम से किस तरह की चीजें फैलाई जा रही है। और एक जो नेशनल हेल्थ मिशन के द्वारा जो कम्युनिटी बेस्ड मॉनिटरिंग की जो प्रक्रिया चली थी, तो उसके ऊपर काफी बात हुई कल, और उसमें जो हमको क्या सुझाव है वो कि ऐसे कोई संस्था हो राज्य स्तर पे जो कि इस तरह का जिसकी वो क्षमता हो और एक पर्सपेक्टिव हो, जिसमें वो इन चीजों को इस राज्य में सामाजिक अंकेक्षण की चीजों को वो कर सकते हैं, क्योंकि इसमें ये भी बार बार बात आई कि सॉरी
You need to wind up, Sulakshana.
Yeah. तो उसमें और क्या हमारी लर्निंग रही है कि ये जटिल है लेकिन कॉम्प्रिहेंसिव भी बनाना जरूरी है। जो सामाजिक कारक है स्वास्थ्य के, उनको भी हमें देखने की जरूरत है हमारे ऑडिट्स में, और ह्यूमन रिसोर्स की क्या स्थिति है, रिसर्च की, HMIS जो इंफॉर्मेशन सिस्टम्स की क्या स्थिति है, और बजट कल एक प्रस्तुतिकरण बजट पे था जो कि बहुत एक क्रिटिकल टूल हमारे पास है जवाबदेही का। और फिर ये लास्ट वाला है स्लाइड मेरा, और ये चीज एक्चुअली फाइनली हमारा ये कंक्लूजन था कि सामुदायिक स्तर पे हम लोग सोशल ऑडिट्स कर रहे हैं, वो तो करना चाहिए और हम कर भी रहे हैं, लेकिन हमें जो व्यापक जो राजनीतिक जो स्थिति है, राजनीतिक स्थिति को हमें उस पर भी हमें काम करने की बहुत जरूरी है कि जैसे कोई जो है कानूनी फ्रेमवर्क नहीं है अभी राइट टू हेल्थ के लिए, तो फिर हम मांगे तो क्या मांगे। फिर बजट बहुत कम है यहाँ पे, स्वास्थ्य के लिए बहुत कम खर्चे किए जा रहे हैं, और जो खर्चे किए जा रहे हैं बहुत सारा उसको स्वास्थ्य के निजीकरण में वो खर्चा किया जा रहा है, बीमा योजना एक्सेट्रा के बारे में, और जो कि ज्यादातर निजी क्षेत्र उसको चला रहा है, और लेकिन निजी क्षेत्र को हमको नियंत्रण करने के कोई उपाय नहीं है, और वो हमारे लिए बहुत चैलेंजिंग रहता है क्योंकि हम ह्यूमन राइट्स कमीशन में जाते हैं या मिनिस्ट्री में जाते हैं, वो बोलते हैं ये हमारे कार्य क्षेत्र में नहीं आता है। फिर जो दूसरा चीज है कि जो समाज सिविल सोसाइटी की जो स्पेस है वो कम होती जा रही है। तो अगर एक अथॉरिटेरियन गवर्नमेंट है, किस तरह का सरकार है आपके पास, आप किस राजनीतिक एक एनवायरनमेंट में काम कर रहे हैं, तो उन सारी चीजें जो है हमारे काम में, समुदाय के काम में भी उसका बहुत असर पड़ेगा। तो इसलिए बहुत जरूरी है कि हम इन सब चीजों का विश्लेषण करें और इसके ऊपर जो है हम अपनी मांगे रखें, हम इसके ऊपर काम करें, अभियान करें। एंड हमने ये भी कंक्लूड किया कि सोशल ऑडिट को एक एक्टिविटी, एक कार्यक्रम देखना चाहिए, एक और बड़े सामाजिक जो जवाबदेही है जो हम मांग रहे हैं सरकार से, उसका एक वो भाग हो। बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद।
Thank you very much, Sulakshana. Could I request the next group? Who is that to be? I'm sorry, I don't have these names. Who will present this next group on social audits in the field of education? So who will present this?
Hello, this is Biplab. I'm just going to present that.
Yeah, Biplab, the floor is yours. 8 minutes, please.
Okay, I'm just able to share it, or
Yeah, we can see it. We can see
okay.
it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So, yesterday we had a long discussion. I will just speak in both English and Hindi time to time. So, where there are like many participants, around 50 participants are there, and then there are many speakers, around 30 speakers were there. So, they are from all across the country. Mainly, we did it in 4 sessions. First session was on possibility and challenges, experience of social audit in education. Second on existing opportunities and mandates of social audit in education. Third one was on entitlements and tools and social audit in education. And fourth on building public audit agenda in education. So where काफी सारे academician और भी जो grassroots में जो काम करते हैं उन लोग भी यहाँ पे participate किया. जो social audit किया था NCPCR के साथ कुछ लोग थे जो 2011-12-13 में social audit किए थे. उनसे भी जो ब्लॉक स्तर पे, जिला स्तर पे, राज्य स्तर पे उनका जो कोऑर्डिनेटर्स थे वो भी पार्टिसिपेट किया, अपना एक्सपीरियंस शेयर किया. काफी सारे टीचर्स अपना एक्सपीरियंस शेयर किया, एकेडमिशियंस भी अपने एक्सपीरियंस शेयर किया. तो वो हम देखेंगे क्या क्या एक्सपीरियंस निकल के आया. तो लार्ज स्केल एक वायलेशन जो हो रहा है, RT 10 साल हो गया, उसके बाद भी जो दिक्कत आ रहा है उसको सबने रखा. फिर दूसरा है कि जो सोशल ऑडिट पहले जो काम किए थे NCPCR पे, उनका अपना अनुभव रखा, जहाँ पे उन्होंने बताया कि जो सस्टेनेबल प्रेशर ग्रुप्स उन्होंने बनाए थे गांव में, जो शिक्षा अधिकार समिति के नाम पे जाना जाता है, तो वो उड़ीसा, MP, बिहार, झारखंड में अलग अलग जगह में उन्होंने काम किया था. तो उनके एक अच्छा अनुभव था, जिससे उन्होंने काफी चेंजेस कर पाया था एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन के साथ. कुछ टीचर्स ने उनके सपोर्ट किया था, कुछ टीचर्स सपोर्ट नहीं किया था उस प्रोसेस में. फिर कुछ SMC मेंबर्स वो पंचायत को भी काफी एम्पावर्ड किया था. बट प्रॉब्लम है कि वो फिर बंद हो गया, फिर वो कट ऑफ हो गया, वो एक्सरसाइज फिर आगे नहीं चल पाया. तो अभी वो एक मुद्दा उभर कर आया. फिर दूसरा जो एक्सपीरियंस बताया कि जो सोशल ऑडिट प्राइवेट स्कूल्स के ऊपर है, जो हम जानते हैं कि जो इकोनॉमिकल वीकर सेक्शन जो चिल्ड्रन है उनको प्राइवेट स्कूल में फ्री में देने के लिए सरकार प्राइवेट स्कूल को पैसा देते हैं. तो वो उसका भी सोशल ऑडिट किया गया है ऑर्गेनाइजेशन द्वारा. उन्होंने अपना एक्सपीरियंस रखा कि प्राइवेट स्कूल का क्या रेगुलेशन है, क्या उन लोग मेंटेन कर पा रहे हैं कि नहीं कर पा रहे. फिर केरला से एक एक्सपीरियंस रखा गया, जहाँ पे उन्होंने लर्निंग फेस्टिवल वहाँ पे ऑर्गेनाइज कर रहे हैं, जहाँ पे बच्चों है, पेरेंट्स है, वो लर्निंग फेस्टिवल में पार्टिसिपेट कर रहे हैं. तो सभी का एक भागीदारी वहाँ पे हो रहा है. तो एक अच्छा एक्सपीरियंस वहाँ पे शेयर हुआ. फिर ऐसे ही है कि एडल्ट एजुकेशन में जो है, बट वहाँ पे ज्यादा सोशल ऑडिट का काम हुआ नहीं है, वो भी बात आया. फिर हायर एजुकेशन में अभी नेशनल एजुकेशन पॉलिसी 2020 आया है, तो उसके बाद हायर एजुकेशन में काफी बदलाव का बात कर रहे हैं, तो वो भी चर्चा में आया. फिर अभी जो कोविड-19 की जो स्थिति है, वहाँ पे कैसे सोशल ऑडिट करेंगे, क्योंकि अब देखते हैं कि पूरा देश में ही एजुकेशन डायरेक्ट जो स्कूल में एजुकेशन है वो बंद हो गया है, या कॉलेजेस सारे बंद हो गए हैं. तो अभी कैसे कर सकते हैं, क्योंकि ऑनलाइन एजुकेशन के माध्यम से सब लोग उसको एक्सेस नहीं कर सकते. तो एक्सेस का एक बहुत बड़ा प्रॉब्लम है जो डिस्कशंस में आया है. तो नेक्स्ट जो बड़ा जो क्वेश्चन आया है कि जो एक ऑनलाइन एजुकेशन के जो चर्चा हो रहा था, उसमें आया कि एक सेक्शन एक्सक्लूड हो गया है पूरा जो ऑनलाइन एजुकेशन सिस्टम से आने के बावजूद. तो वो एक चर्चा में आया. दूसरा है कि जो SMC और पंचायत का जो रोल राइट टू एजुकेशन एक्ट में दिया गया है, उनका एम्पावरमेंट नहीं हुआ है. फिर कोई ग्रीवेंस रिड्रेसल मैकेनिज्म कुछ डेवलप नहीं हो पाया. कम्युनिटी मॉनिटरिंग सिस्टम भी नहीं है, उसकी वजह से 10 साल बाद भी RT का सिचुएशन ऐसा है. तो फिर और एक चर्चा में आया कि हाउ टू इंश्योर कम्युनिटी पार्टिसिपेशन. फिर और एक इशू आया है कि जो एग्जिस्टिंग एंटाइटलमेंट्स है उस पर तो हम चर्चा कर रहे हैं, और उसमें क्या मिस हो रहा है, स्पेशली जब कोविड सिचुएशन आया है और भी नया जो दिक्कत है हम देख रहे हैं पिछले 8-10 महीना में. तो क्या उसमें और भी क्या एंटाइटलमेंट्स आ सकते हैं. और जो जजमेंट्स आया, आप देखेंगे RT 2010 में आने के बाद जो जजमेंट्स आया, जो नया स्कीम्स है या फाइनेंशियल इम्प्लीकेशंस का बात है, वहाँ पे उसमें जो सवाल है, तो उसमें भी हमको सोशल ऑडिट करना पड़ेगा, या कैसे उसको आगे लेना पड़ेगा, उसमें भी चर्चा हुआ. तो क्या क्या एंटाइटलमेंट्स है जो जिसमें चर्चा हुआ. पहला था कि एक्सेस का बात है कि बच्चा कितने आ रहे हैं, कैसे आ रहे हैं, उनके एक्सपीरियंस क्या है स्कूल में, क्लासरूम में. फिर इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर फैसिलिटी का बात हुआ कि जो MDN मिल रहा है कि नहीं, इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर है कि नहीं, ड्रिंकिंग वाटर, टॉयलेट, स्पोर्ट्स गेम्स फैसिलिटीज है कि नहीं. फिर क्वालिटी का भी चर्चा हुआ, जहाँ पे टीचर अवेलेबिलिटी है कि नहीं, उनको TLM यूज कर रहे हैं कि नहीं कर रहे हैं, टीचर्स का प्रिपरेशन परफॉर्मेंस कैसा है, टीचर सपोर्ट सिस्टम है कि नहीं, कम्युनिटी का कोलैबोरेशन कितना है, SMC कितना एम्पावर्ड है. चाइल्ड फ्रेंडली चाइल्ड सेंटर टीचिंग लर्निंग प्रोसेस को हो रहा है कि नहीं हो रहा है, कंटिन्यूअस और कॉम्प्रिहेंसिव लर्निंग असेसमेंट जो लागू होना चाहिए तो अभी तक लागू नहीं हुआ, तो उसके बारे में चर्चा हुआ। फिर होल चाइल्ड डेवलपमेंट का जो बात आरटी में करते हैं उसका क्या स्थिति है। फिर इम्पैक्ट ऑफ ऑनलाइन एजुकेशन की बात हुआ, और जो बात हुआ है कि आरटी आने के बाद कई राज्यों में हम देखें कि उसको डाइल्यूट करने का प्रयास किया गया, उसका भी में चर्चा हुआ। और जो फाइनेंशियल इम्प्लीकेशंस जो है, जो बजटरी पार्ट है, वो कितना पैसा आ रहा है, कितना हो उसका खर्च हो रहा है, कहाँ पे वो खपत हो रहा है, तो वो भी चर्चा में आया। तो जो अपॉर्चुनिटीज हमने देखा कि ये सोशल ऑडिट में ये हमको जो गैप्स सभी को दिखाई दे रहा है कि जो आरटी में कानून में है और जो अभी का जो परिस्थिति है 10 साल बाद तो कानून लागू होने में, तो गैप्स को कैसे हम एड्रेस करें उसके बारे में हुआ। और एक है कि एक अवेयरनेस का और कैपेसिटी बिल्डिंग का जरूरत है। तीसरा है कि एक रिसोर्स पर्सन को ट्रेन करने का जरूरत है लार्ज स्केल में पूरा देश भर में, कि कैसे हम सोशल ऑडिट करेंगे आरटी में। फिर चौथा है कि कैसे बच्चों को इस चीज़ों में इन्वॉल्व करेंगे इश्यूज में, क्योंकि बच्चों इन्वॉल्व नहीं करते हैं। हम ज़्यादातर देखते हैं कि जो बच्चे पढ़ते हैं उन लोग को इन्वॉल्व करने से जो सिस्टम है उसमें काफ़ी बदलाव हुआ है, वो काफ़ी अच्छे एक्सपीरियंसेस भी काफ़ी सारे प्रेजेंट किए थे। तो वो बच्चों को कैसे इन्वॉल्व करें वो भी वो देखना पड़ेगा। और जो कंसर्न अथॉरिटी है, जो डिपार्टमेंट है एजुकेशन डिपार्टमेंट में या गवर्नमेंट में, कैसे उनको एसोसिएट करें ये पूरा प्रोसेस है। और कैसे जो वायलेशन और अब्यूज जो हो रहा है आरटी एक्ट का, उसको कैसे बंद किया जा सकता है, कैसे एविडेंसेस बिल्डअप किया जा सकता है ताकि वो वायलेशन बंद हो। और एडल्ट एजुकेशन और हायर एजुकेशन में भी कि कभी एजेंडा में लाना पड़ेगा, क्योंकि वो एजेंडा में नहीं है। स्पेशली एडल्ट एजुकेशन जो पहले जो साक्षरता का जो चल रहा था पिछले 20 साल में, वो ये नया पिछले 2-3 साल में वो बंद कर दिया गया है। उसको कैसे फिर उसको सामने ले आ जा सकते हैं, उसमें भी चर्चा हुआ है। और कुछ चैलेंजेस हमने उभर कर आया है, जैसे स्पेस नहीं है एग्जिस्टिंग सिस्टम में। फिर लैक ऑफ इम्प्लीमेंटेशन ऑफ आरटी एक्ट, क्योंकि अभी भी देखते हैं कि करोड़ के तादाद पे बच्चे अभी भी स्कूल से बाहर है, एक्सेस नहीं है, इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर स्कूल में नहीं है, क्वालिटी एजुकेशन का बहुत हालत खराब है। फिर लैक ऑफ मॉनिटरिंग ऑफ एसएमसी एंड पंचायत एसएमसी का काफी उनको रोल मिला था, बट वो भी उनका जो जिम्मेदारी वो निभा नहीं पा रहे। फिर चौथा है कि जो विलेज चाइल्ड प्रोटेक्शन कमिटी इज नॉट फंक्शनिंग, जो चाइल्ड प्रोटेक्शन कमिटी को करना चाहिए था, जो चाइल्ड लाइन के साथ उनको जोड़ के पूरा चीज को, जो चाइल्ड लेबर हो रहा है, स्पेशली अभी कोविड के टाइम में हम ये बात उभर कर रहा है कि काफी जगह में चाइल्ड लेबर बढ़ गया है, उसको कैसे कम किया जा सकता है, कैसे बच्चों को फिर एजुकेशन सिस्टम में लाया जा सकता है, कैसे, उसमें भी काफी चर्चा हुआ। फिर कम्युनिटीज रोल और कैसे मैकेनिज्म है का, या अवेयरनेस नहीं है, इसके बारे में चर्चा हुआ। और लैक ऑफ एक्शन ऑन कलेक्टिव एविडेंसेस एंड वायलेंसेस, ये भी इश्यूज आए। तो ये मोटा मोटा जो है, इसमें मैं कंक्लूड करना चाहूंगा क्या हो सकता है कि एक एनवायरमेंट बिल्डिंग का एक्सरसाइज का जरूरत है आरटी के ऊपर, और न्यू एजुकेशन पॉलिसी 2020 का जो आया है उसके ऊपर एक अवेयरनेस और कैपेसिटी बिल्डिंग का चाहिए पूरा कम्युनिटी का, ये चर्चा में आया। फिर जो शिक्षा संवाद है, वो जो डिफरेंट जो स्टेक होल्डर्स एजुकेशन में, उनका साथ एक लंबा डायलॉग होना चाहिए। और एडवोकेसी की भी बात है। फिर एक सस्टेनेबल फंक्शनिंग ग्रुप्स होना चाहिए ग्रासरूट लेवल पे। और जो सारे टूल्स का बात हुआ, वो टूल्स भी जो बना रहे हैं उसमें बच्चों और कम्युनिटी का उसमें इन्वॉल्व होना चाहिए, और स्पेशली डिसएडवांटेज चिल्ड्रन और ट्राइबल चिल्ड्रन के लिए अलग से टूल बनाना चाहिए। और ये काफी सारे पार्टिसिपेटरी टूल भी यूज करना चाहिए, जैसे लर्निंग फेस्टिवल है। और जो ऑडिट सोशल ऑडिट होना चाहिए, उसमें कंटेंट ऑडिट एक बहुत बड़ा पार्ट होना चाहिए, जिसमें रेगुलर मॉनिटरिंग हो। रेगुलर मॉनिटरिंग नहीं होगा तो चेंजेस लाना बहुत मुश्किल होगा। और कैसे कम्युनिटी को इन्वॉल्व करते हुए ऑथेंटिक सिस्टम असेसमेंट हम कर सकते हैं। और लास्ट पार्ट है कि एक नेशनल प्लेटफॉर्म होना चाहिए जो सोशल ऑडिट ऑफ एजुकेशन, उसको बनाना चाहिए जो आगे जाके इस काम को आगे ले जा सकते हैं। इतना सारे डिस्कशंस कंक्लूजन पूरा प्रोसेस से आया है, तो टाइम बहुत कम है, तो इसलिए मैं करना चाहूंगा।
Could we have the next group, please? Could the next group please take the mic, introduce yourselves?
Yeah, good afternoon, sir. This is Jeevan Kumar from CIVIC.
Yes.
I would be making a presentation on urban development.
8 minutes, Mr. Jeevan Kumar. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yeah, so this was, I'll just, I'll be very brief. We have a bullet point PPT with us. What I will do is present our discussions in the format that has been given to us. Key entitlements first, then the state of public oversight, then challenges and the next steps. I will not be explaining the points because of shortage of time. During discussion, perhaps one could go into all those details. The first aspect, which looks at key entitlements requiring social audit. This is a fairly big list of entitlements that we have identified, beginning with the 74th Constitutional Amendment and the 18 functions that were placed in the 12th schedule following the amendment. What is the extent of devolution of the 18 functions that have happened? That is one of the key entitlements. Then the devolution of the 3 Fs in terms of funds, functions, and functionaries. This also requires a social audit. And the devolution of funds as per the State Finance Commission recommendations. These are extremely important, so we put them right on top. Moving down to the structure of urban local bodies, ward committees and their functioning require social audit. In the context of the pandemic, ward disaster management cells are very important to be set up. They require social audit, area sabas and their functioning. A lot of schemes are being implemented in the area of urban development, be they social infrastructure schemes, physical infrastructure schemes. We've given a list of these schemes here. Each of these schemes is very important in the context of the sector that we're looking at. And we thought they also require social audit. Land audit is very important, especially since land is being acquired by the government and by corporations in a big way, especially for big projects like smart cities. So we thought land audit should also be subject to public or social audit. What is the extent of adherence to the Citizens Charter? Urban local bodies are governed by or have provided for citizen charters, but are they just for namesake, or are they being adhered to? Delivery of public services. Functioning of school management committees, Bal Vikas Samithis of Anganwadis, vigilance committees of the PDS scheme, Rogi Kalyan Samithis of hospitals. These are important committees in the area of urban development. They require social audit. Several grievance redressal systems are there. They too require social audit. Social protection systems for the vulnerable sections. We have a whole lot of vulnerable sections living in cities, be they below poverty line families, be they malnourished, out of school children, unemployed, shelterless minds. The list is fairly big, but all of them, urban local bodies do provide for social protection systems. They require social audit. There are special schemes and programs for scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. Then food security, health, education, childcare systems, contracts, tendering processes, especially in the context of solid waste management or program of works, relief and rehabilitation for those who are displaced from the multiple projects that urban development is seeing, adherence to zonal regulations, building bylaws, kind of pollution of air, water and soil, urban planning processes. And finally, environmental impact assessment, discretionary spending by councillors. Quite a few lakhs of rupees are being spent by councillors under the heading of discretionary spending, resettlement projects, and finally, delivery of take-home ration, midday meals schemes for children and so on. So all of these we have included in the first category of key entitlements. The list is fairly large. But in the area of urban development, we think these are the key entitlements that require social audit. Moving to the second area of the state of public oversight, we don't have much to say here. We are expected to look at both government and civil society-led initiatives as far as public oversight is concerned in urban development. Internal oversight mechanisms within the government do exist. Even within the ULBs, they do exist. A brief list is given here. Government oversight over ULBs could be direct or it could be indirectly through the Department of Urban Development. We also have legislative oversight over the urban local bodies. And there are internal oversight mechanisms also as mandated by relevant enactments or by citizen charters and so on. So these are internal oversight mechanisms that exist, but how effective they are, one is not very sure. one has to really break one's head with the authorities to find out, to get documents and to find out how things are happening. And therefore, one notices that citizens largely rely on RTI mechanisms to get information that they want pertaining to public oversight or pertaining to something else. And therefore, a major point that we are making here in the second section is that there is a strong need for institutionalizing civil society-led mechanisms for public oversight of urban local bodies. Moving over to the third area, which is looking at challenges to public or social audits in urban development. Our list begins with the fact that one is not very clear about what public or social audit is. In fact, there is a distinction. I realized this at the discussion yesterday. There is a distinction, but is everybody, are all stakeholders aware of this distinction between public audit and social audit? We were also very clear that urban development is a sector requiring drastic reform. We are very clear on this, that a comprehensive set of reforms in urban development needs to be put in place before social audit is undertaken. Another point that we discussed is the fact that urban governance systems are not as clear as rural governance systems. Because urban governance systems do not lend themselves to social audit as easily as in the case of rural local bodies. We can discuss this a little later. I don't have time to go into details. Another challenge is the absence of a legal mandate. Social audit in urban development, as somebody put it, is delving into uncharted territory. So unless there's a clear legal mandate, as in the case of rural development, some schemes were identified, we are on unfirm ground. And the fifth challenge is the existence of multiple institutions in the urban development sector, which kind of complicates the entire process. So many parastatals and auditing of parastatals and so on. So this is another challenge. The sixth challenge is about whether one is talking of social audit of projects or of processes. In both the scenarios, there are problems because in the case of urban development projects, we see the scenario of bypass. Democratic requirements are bypassed. Norms are bypassed, so that's a problem there. If you're auditing processes, especially looking at auditing of plan implementation processes, then it requires clear-cut guidelines, clear-cut protocols to be put in place. This is challenge number 6. The seventh challenge is about the spatiality and the scale of urban social audits, because you're looking at a variety of things that have to be audited. Are you doing it? At what level are you doing it? At what scale is one doing it? So this poses a challenge. There's also the challenge of absence of clarity on the mechanisms for delivering social justice, especially the vulnerable sections of society in urban areas. Preparation of action taken reports on public, on social audit reports and so on. This could be a challenge. And last but not the least, I think a very big challenge is that of all-pervasive corruption, which urban local bodies are notorious for. I finally come to the fourth, the last area in the outline, Chairperson, sir, which looks at identifying the next steps towards building or strengthening a public audit agenda in the field of urban development. A few areas are identified. As we said earlier, a comprehensive set of reforms in the urban development sector is extremely important. Before one gets into public or social audit, one needs these reforms to be put in place. As we said earlier, also legal mandates for social audit, as in the case of National Rural Employment Guarantee schemes in rural areas, rural development. We need such legal mandates. If it can be written into the program itself or into the project itself, that would make audit that much easier. For mega projects, one needs processes and protocols to be put in place, because one is treading into areas which are not easily auditable. Fourth, the next step is that if one is to undertake the first wave or the first generation of social audits, well, this could be done in areas as far as existing schemes and projects are concerned, and housing projects would be a good beginning because systems are in place and audit of such schemes and projects may not be very difficult. CAG has come up with a set of guidelines for conducting social audit. These guidelines would be very useful for not only for urban development, but in the other sectors also. In the rural development sector, there are many lessons one can learn in urban development from the social audit mechanisms which are currently being used. That is something that you're flagging here. And lastly, seventhly, we'd like ward Sabha meetings convened for specific sections like urban children and women. This is also happening in the rural development. The Gram Sabha meetings are held specifically for certain sections of people. This could be repeated at the urban level also. Eighthly, the composition of social audit teams are very important. Who should be in the social audit teams, and we've given a rough list here of who should find their place in the social audit teams. Ninthly, the reports of the social audit reports must be presented in ward Sabha meetings, ward committee meetings, and the findings should be discussed. Otherwise, there's no point in conducting audit at all. And last but not the least, during this pandemic time, we emphasize that social audits are even more essential. So that's our summary of discussion, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we've had these three presentations. I'm grateful to the three presenters, and I'm sorry that we've had to rush you through this. Clearly, each one of these needed much more time for a proper presentation, but thank you for what you've done. Am I right? There is no other presentation to be made. Am I correct?
That's right.
I see three hands have been raised. Could I?
No, those are we'll take those at the end. And
we'll take those. Fine. Okay, fine. You won't look at. Now I would like to call on our discussants to speak, but before I do so, I would just like to flag a couple of issues. I mean, we've listened to three very interesting presentations, but there is one question which has not really been. Well, I'm sure it came up in discussion, but I couldn't get a sense of that in the presentations, which is really, I mean, who does all this? I mean, whose responsibility is it? Mr. Jeevan Kumar in his presentation talked about the difference between audit led by government and audit led by the community. This didn't come out so clearly in the other two presentations. But then when we make recommendations like there is a need to ensure community participation. Yes, of course, there is a need to ensure community participation, but whose job is it? Is it the job of the community itself? Is it the job of the local government authority? The health presentation also warned against the danger of being co-opted within health systems. In fact, there was something, I mean, there was a discussion saying that should the whole social audit process be lackey or liberated? So this can be argued. So should this process be driven entirely by the community? If so, what legitimacy will government give it? Is it to be driven by government? If so, what legitimacy will the community give it? So there's clearly a question of who moves this and who gives authority to whom. And I think we have to look at the possibility of a legal support to whatever social audit mechanisms are put in place. And I would like our discussants to try and specifically look at this point. I'm sure they have other things to say, but I would like them to look specifically at this question of, at the end of the day, whose responsibility is it to ensure that there is a properly designed, properly conducted social audit of rural development schemes involving which attempt to provide benefits to large numbers of people. I think we need an answer to that question, because the questions raised are correct, the issues raised are all correct, but to my mind, there is no clarity on this question of who is responsible. Now, I would like to call on our discussants now. We have four experts. We have Karuna, Akella from the who does social audit for the government of Tamil Nadu. We have Amitabh, Behar, the CEO of Oxfam. We have Mr. Sampath Kumar, Commissioner Secretary, Health and Family Welfare in the government of Meghalaya. And we have Yamini, Aiyar, the President of CPR Delhi. And I would like to call on Karuna, Akella to start. Each of our discussants, you have 10 minutes, please, and I'd be grateful if you could try and stick within that, because that means we have more time for group discussion. So Karuna, Akella, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, this is Karuna. I would like to speak maybe after all the other speakers have had their say, because I joined in a little late. So I would certainly want to hear others and then speak.
I think step in. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm from Telangana actually, not Tamil Nadu.
I'm sure I said Telangana. I'm sorry if I said Tamil Nadu. My apologies. I thought I had said Telangana. Is Amitabh there? Amitabh, Behar, would you like to go? If Amitabh is not there.
This is Sampath Kumar. Sir,
would you like to go, Mr. Sampath Kumar? The floor is yours.
Yeah, I would like to go because I also have an assembly related.
You have 10 minutes, Sampath Kumar. Yes.
Yeah, sure. So thank you, sir. In fact, I think I'll start with what you said, what you asked. I think then. So who is, in fact, what you said, who is responsible for doing these social audits? So in fact, we have these independent social audit units are there in many states. In fact, in the state of Meghalaya, we also have the independent social audit unit. And besides that, in Meghalaya, we also have brought a social audit law. In fact, we have in 2017, we have brought out Meghalaya Community Participation and Public Services Social Audit Act. And that actually covers about a range of developmental programs. This includes the entire healthcare programs. So that's basically who have to do this one. Basically, we require to have an independent mechanism. It's a very important. And through that independent mechanism, again, we need to build the capacity of the communities at a village and locality level where they can actually conduct these social audits at their own level. So that is a very important process. So for that, we do engage non-governmental organizations as a social audit facilitators. But what we require is that we really involve that independent community social auditors who are trained and involved. And there is a proper process. They should not be part of any of the committees. For example, they should not be part of a village health and sanitation committee to conduct the social audit of the healthcare program in the village. So that way, there is a rigorous process is there, sir. So coming back, I just wanted to, first of all, I wanted to thank the organizers for inviting me for this discussion. Social audit is so important. In fact, I see social audit is very important for building the state capacity. So this is, in fact, that's so important from the government perspective. I think it's such an important thing. So in fact, we have a lot of intention in terms of implementing different programs and making sure that the people get their rights and entitlements. So there is all good intention is there from the side of the government, but when these programs are being implemented, we often find them that they're not being properly implemented, or the poorest of the poor are left out. So all these actually issues can be fixed with the social audit process. So social audit is a process that actually fixes the problems both at the supply side and also at the demand side. So from the supply side, it would bring more accountability and more responsibility, and people do know that these are the services, in fact, we need to provide in a proper manner. Otherwise, there is a mechanism on a regular basis. Every year this process happens, and we are accountable. From the demand side, the social audit also actually in fact brings that awareness and builds that capacity, and in fact generates the demand from within the community and enables that community participation to access their the various services that are being provided by the the government. So that way, it's a solution for both supply side and the demand side. So that needs to be understood by everyone. So besides that, in fact, what we also in fact when we look at from the for implementation of the social audit, we need to really bring in a lot of sensitization from the government machinery also. So people should not see that this is something that which is making them more accountable. In fact, they should also see that this is a tool actually which is helping them. So I think that perspective need to be brought in. So we are actually in the state of Meghalaya, we are also using it to other concepts along with the social audit. One we call it like PDII, problem driven iterative adaptation approach, where we are in fact involving the people at the very decentralized level, PHC, CSC level, the medical officers, the CDPOs, all the departments who are actually coming together and trying to understand, okay, these are the problems in the state. We have highest, we have in fact very high maternal mortality. How actually we can affect the maternal mortality? So we are actually, putting that institutional capacity, a lot of focus on institutional capacity, so that they would be more sensitive towards these issues. It should not be an issue of only the NGOs. It should be an issue of everyone. So that is the kind of thing that we are trying to bring in. And the last questions, like for me, actually, for the social audit, some of the issues how actually we can include in the social audit, I would see, especially how actually we can bring in the especially issues like gender inequality. Some of these issues.
Can I just? You are health secretary in your state. We'd be very interested to know what it is as health secretary you would like to see happening in the health area when it comes to social audit. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt.
So I'll touch upon that one. So the other things, for example, so you rightly said, in fact, as a health secretary, we have been actually looking at improving the basic parameters. How actually we can improve the institutional deliveries, antenatal care, postnatal care. So basically, like if I look at the basic parameters, what we wanted to improve, to do these things, in fact, how actually social audit is actually helping, what kind of an entitlements are there, what kind of processes are there. And in fact, one of the things that social audit also, we are using it is like to generate awareness on, accessing not only the various entitlement, but also to understand the lot of knowledge, so that, there is a significant improvement in terms of the practices, whether that health-seeking behavior to go to the hospitals for institutional deliveries, or adopting the practices like skin to skin care to if there is a home delivery. So some of these things we are trying to bring that those elements also to improve those indicators. And one of the things that what our experience in Meghalaya as a health secretary that I have observed is that the issue is not only the medical services or the health services. It's also a lot of socio-economic issues are related to the delivery of this health services. In fact, there is we see gender inequality is a major issue in terms of like for our high maternal mortality. In fact, though it's a matrilineal society, there are certain stereotypes and there is a gender norms within the community. So there is no right to access to birth spacing, and there is a tremendous problems are there. So we'd like to bring my questions actually for the discussants is that how actually we can actually bring in these elements into the social audit process, how actually we can address some of these important dimensions which are actually not taken up through the process, social audit process directly, but how actually we can bring in those elements, because unless we address those issues, we cannot actually get that full results what we wanted to achieve. So that's about from my side, sir. So I'll stop here. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. One quick question, which is Kumar. Thank you for your presentation. You said that your government has a law.
Yes.
Now, does this law allow persons who are chosen to be part of these social audit committees at the village level, are they paid for this, or are they expected to be a voluntary service?
It's a voluntary service. So basically, the training is given to them, and
but they have to give up their time voluntarily. I mean,
that's
they are busy people. You expect someone to take time out to go and be part of a social audit team, etc.
Yeah.
But I suppose that's, and what has been, it's a 2017 law. So in the last couple of years, what is your experience been in the working of those?
In fact, sir, we are also doing a study. It's a kind of a cluster randomized study that we are making. Like basically, we will share those results maybe after a year. So the study is in process. So we are also trying to find out like what is the effect of the social audit in terms of increasing the awareness among the people. What is the, all that we are trying to find out from, we have a control villages and also we have the intervention villages.
Okay, thank you. I'm sure there'll be more questions later, but now I'd like to ask Amitabh. Amitabh, are you ready to go?
Yes.
Fine. The floor is yours. You have 10 minutes, Amitabh.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Desiraju. Somebody was saying something. So am I all right? Should I start?
I think they've stopped saying it, whatever they were saying.
Okay. All right. So thanks a lot. So सबको नमस्ते, सलाम, जय भीम, जिंदाबाद। मुझे जब रक्षिता ने खत लिखा इस संगोष्ठी के लिए, तो मुझे ऐसा लगा कि शायद मैं इस चर्चा के लिए ना आऊं, और उसकी वजह बहुत सरल सी है, सरल शायद जटिल है, पर सरल मुझे लगा। मुझे ऐसा लगा कि इन दिनों अकाउंटेबिलिटी पर काम करना, और मैं बहुत अरसे तक ये काम करता रहा, लेकिन जो राजनीतिक परिस्थिति है जहां पर बुनियादी संविधान के मूल्यों की अकाउंटेबिलिटी नहीं है, और हम अब ये देख रहे हैं कि अकाउंटेबिलिटी इस बात की है कि मैनिफेस्टो में राम मंदिर बनना था, मैनिफेस्टो में 370 हटाना था, उस पर अकाउंटेबिलिटी की अगर राजनीतिक चर्चा हो रही है, तो शायद इस तरह के अकाउंटेबिलिटी के काम को बहुत महत्व नहीं मिल रहा है। पर जब मैंने फिर थोड़ा और सोचा तो मुझे ऐसा लगा कि शायद बहुत जरूरी है इस काम को हमें करते रहना और इसको मजबूत करते रहना। So I just wanted to say that I was uncomfortable in the last, in many ways I have not been engaging with this space for the last couple of years intensively, but I do think it's one of the most critical spaces. And this, what I'll try and do is, I heard the 3 presentations, and thank you for all the 3 presentations, and they've been very good in mapping out the landscape of what's happening on the ground, and also what are the key issues, including systemic issues, and also in terms of identifying some pathways for moving ahead. But let me also say, like you, I was also keen to hear maybe what is at the moment working. It might have been worthwhile. There might not be stellar examples, but few examples of what's working at the moment might have given us some more concrete ideas of what needs to be built further. Because we've been doing these conversations for a long time, and in many ways the debate does not move forward. So, just to add to the sad scenario that we have already heard from, let me just share some very basic data that I just got from one of our internal Oxfam publications. और क्योंकि हम सोशल ऑडिट की बात कर रहे हैं, जन निगरानी की बात कर रहे हैं, तो मैंने SMCs का एक छोटा सा डेटा लिया, और उसमें मैंने देखा कि भारत में सिर्फ 49% SMCs बनी है, और वो किस तरह से काम, कितना मुकम्मल काम करती हैं उस पर कमेंट नहीं है, पर सिर्फ बनी है, उनका निर्माण हुआ है। सिर्फ 21% गवर्नमेंट एडेड स्कूल्स में आपको SMCs मिलेंगी। ट्रेनिंग का अगर आप देखें उनमें से कितनी की ट्रेनिंग हुई है, तो बहुत ही अनइवन पिक्चर है। वेस्ट बंगाल में 5% है और पंजाब में 90% है, पर ज्यादातर राज्यों में उन SMCs की ट्रेनिंग बहुत कम हो पाई है। इनके लिए जो फॉर्मेट्स हैं, और आप देख रहे हैं मैं कोशिश कर रहा हूं उसके अलग अलग आयाम पर थोड़ा सा आंकड़ा शेयर करने का, कि आप अगर इनके जो फॉर्मेट हैं स्कूल डेवलपमेंट प्लान के, ये 50 पन्नों के होते हैं। तो आप अगर ये उम्मीद करते हैं कि SMC के सदस्य प्रोएक्टिवली 50 पन्नों को भरकर स्कूल डेवलपमेंट प्लान बना पाएंगे, तो वो बहुत ही मुश्किल होता है उन लोगों के लिए. सो एक्सट्रीमली कॉम्प्लिकेटेड फॉर्मेट. और रिसोर्सेज की भी बात हुई थी, तो रिसोर्सेज में मैं सिर्फ ये कहना चाहूंगा कि हर स्कूल में सिर्फ 3,000 रुपए मुहैया कराया जाता है SMCs की मीटिंग और उसकी ट्रेनिंग के लिए. तो आपको मैंने सिर्फ SMCs का आंकड़ा दिया जो अलग तरह से आ रहा था, साफ नजर आ रहा था. तो इस परिप्रेक्ष्य में मैं सिर्फ 5 या 6 मुख्य बातें कहना चाहता हूँ. And so let me start, and this I think Desiraju ji, it will address the question that you left us with. I think the first, our experience and my experience when I was at NFI, we were supporting a lot of urban development work, particularly from the social accountability lens. I've worked on budgets, and right now we work on social accountability on education and health, though it's the work has shrunk. That it has to be an ecosystem approach at the local level. To just focus on the institutional aspects, to say that the government needs to form the SMCs is going to be very, very inadequate. Probably same amount of effort or greater effort needs to go into building or mobilizing the community in those areas. So without that, probably the whole idea of social accountability is not going to work. And I think that's critical. We've not got the balance right. Most of the experiences where we have seen either we have had fantastic experiences, starting obviously with the pioneering work of MKSS, where we saw phenomenal amount of energy going from civil society, from community in getting those Jan Sunwais. And then we have seen in the last few years, sudden upscaling by the government to the entire state. And that's not worked. So ensuring that this is an ecosystem approach, and we'll need to do that. So that's one. The second, I think, and it has come out very clearly, that ultimately accountability, Nigrani, is a political question. And to actually decontextualize it from its local political context and to embed it in the bureaucratic structures is going to be counterproductive. So it's good that pretty much all the three, the third one was clearly the urban development was talking about the local bodies, but even the first two clearly wanted to talk of its linkages with the panchayat system. But if we are not going to adequately embed these social audits, the social accountability mechanisms of whatever domain it is in the local self-government system, it's unlikely to fly. And the more you go up higher in the bureaucratic structure, they'll find ways of curtailing whatever the local social accountability is being able to do. So that's the second point. The third, I think I wanted to make, and it's again been made, and I kind of started with that, and apologies because that's my preoccupation, that when there is a larger political discourse which is actually going against the tide of social accountability, then what are the spaces left for us? So all the work we do on social accountability, how does it get, I would say, embedded, or I would actually say complement, say, the work against privatization of basic services? So if you're really looking at privatization of schools, you're looking at shutdown of government schools across several parts of the country. In that, we are talking about social accountability tools in a very, very specific context. So the larger political trend, and we also see how the whole idea of rights and entitlements itself is under threat in the current political regime. And therefore, the logic of social accountability has to be fused with the struggles against privatization or dilution of entitlements. And this is obviously again happening in the context of, we have seen what's happening, say, through the transparency institutions that we're talking of. The fourth point that I wanted to make, and that is, I think, to an extent would respond to your question. As in, to my mind, it is a conceptual point, but it's a strategy point. That are these social accountability spaces invited spaces, or are they going to be claimed spaces? And the experience that at least I have seen, which is very, very limited compared to all of you present here, is that invited spaces have not worked. And it is the claimed space that has worked. And I think we need to acknowledge that, and probably not, not be, I would say, either greedy or be very, very hopeful in saying that creating invited spaces will solve the problem. It is not going to solve the problem. So having the claimed space is in itself a fundamental pillar of accountability. And somewhere we probably get lured in by the hope that it can be scaled up and you can have invited spaces across. So that's the fourth point. And therefore the question that you're asking, किसकी जिम्मेदारी है? मुझे लगता है कि वो समुदाय की अपनी जिम्मेदारी है और उसको उठाना ही पड़ेगा. इस तरह की राजनीति में वही वर्क करेगा. The fifth, I think, just one additional point on the social accountability piece is, I think one of the frameworks could be of what now, say, the Sustainable Development Goals are using, which is the LNOB, the Leave No One Behind framework. So how do you bring the most marginalized, and you can just go back to Gandhiji's talisman, it's essentially the same. If you do the social accountability from the perspective of a child, urban development from, say, the perspective of a child or an elderly or from the disabled perspective, will be able to address a lot of other questions itself. So just bringing that framework, again, it was brought in, but I just thought that it would be critical to highlight. Let me just end with two final points. Somewhere I do think that it is the paradox of democracy and social audit or social accountability, I would say. If you have a reasonably robust democracy, then the institutions themselves would be good enough for ensuring social accountability. They're not good precisely because of that. You need social accountability, but then they will not come to you on a platter. And therefore, it is really building up the democratic movement. And in that, I would, I just wanted to end by saying that this has to be seen, so the social audit seen as a process of ensuring accountability. I would at this moment, 5 साल पहले मैं कहता कि बिल्कुल वही ऑब्जेक्टिव है. शायद अब मैं थोड़ा उससे हट रहा हूं और मैं कहूंगा कि वह तो महत्वपूर्ण है, पर वो प्रक्रिया भी बहुत महत्वपूर्ण है, क्योंकि वह प्रक्रिया है जिससे कि एक लोकतांत्रिक ताकत को मजबूत किया जा सकता है. So it's the process of, or the spaces of social audit, the idea of social audit is essentially about building a political democratic movement. And that's really at the core of our conversations, I hope, today. Because otherwise, if we go into a limited way of looking at social audits as a tool or something that will only provide us some bulwark against corruption or demand some individual accountability from officers or even systemic accountability, it's unlikely, because it is a political battle now. And in that, how do we use this social accountability discourse as a brick by brick building of a democratic struggle? Thank you. We can't hear you. You are muted, Desiraju.
Yeah, thanks very much. I particularly like the last point you made, because that was that's the same point you can make about the whole right to information process also. It was much bigger than simply asking for details of specific activities. It was the underlying of a sound democratic movement, the right to information and access to information, especially from government. And I also like the interesting difference you made between invited and claimed spaces. I think we have to come back to that. Yamini, are you there, and will you go ahead with your presentation? Yamini, yeah. Hi.
Hi.
Yamini, the floor is yours. Yeah.
Thanks, Keshav, and thanks Anandita and Rakshita for organizing such an important discussion. And no thanks to Amitabh, who's basically said everything that I was planning to say. Now it's left me struggling to think of something new. So I'm now in the unenviable task of having to find new words of repeating many of the things that Amitabh has already said. But let me say, I think the point where Amitabh started in that we are at a particular moment in our democracy where fundamental accepted tenets of within the constitution that were to frame and shape the nature of our democratic path are itself currently going through their own sets of challenges, questions, and renegotiation. And to my mind, the value of social audits lies not exactly as Amitabh was saying in the question of kaun karega or kis tarike se hoga, as much as fundamentally re-infusing core values of democratic practice within the citizenry. And to me, having been an active participant in social audits many years ago, and with the with time and reflection and age, looking back at those moments, I think what was most valuable about the social audit process was the deliberative spaces that it created through the process of taking very tangible experiences through which citizens engage, through which ordinary people engage with government, and using those tangible experiences to create spaces for debating, dialogue, discussion, questioning, which often do not occur without those in our public sphere, absent the mechanisms of the social audit. So for me, as a student of social audits, I had always looked at it to try and ask and answer questions that at that point in time were relevant, or at least one thought that they were the most crucial. What is a social audit doing in terms of reducing corruption? What is a social audit doing in terms of strengthening the quality of service delivery? What is social audit doing in terms of building feedback loops, the demand and supply questions that Sampath was talking about? But actually the core essence of the social audit is none of that. The core essence of the social audit is the modes through which it infuses the practice of deliberative dialogue within communities, and through which it creates the practice of engaging with government in a way where citizens actually have the power to ask government questions. And that, I think, is what one must never lose sight of as we start getting into the conversation about the nuts and bolts of how one actually conducts a social audit. And I wonder if it is worth going back to this question of invited versus claimed spaces of social audits, and look at it more from the perspective of what is needed, what are the conditions under which one can infuse more space, more opportunities for deeper deliberation through mechanisms like social audits. So how can one use social audits as ways of strengthening the actual practice of democracy and creating public spheres which where citizens ask difficult questions, or ask questions, forget difficult, but just ask questions of government. And none of these questions need to be about difficult constitutional questions. None of these questions need to be about the complex debates and challenges that India confronts today about its constitutional imagination, its imagination at the point of independence to where we are today in many of its contestations. These are fundamentally questions of deepening citizenship and of citizens debating and dialoguing with one another to arrive at what sounds very intangible and almost too theoretical, but really is what makes for social norms of acceptance of mutual relationships that we have with one another and our collective expectations of what we ask of our state. Until we don't build those spaces and build those sets of expectations from the grassroots up, any talk of democracy will always find itself reduced to a set of institutional frameworks, which we can lament their atrophy of over time as we do now, and a set of and will always remain vulnerable to exactly the kind of strongman populist democracy that and electoral authoritarianism that many of us in this room are challenging today. So for me, actually reclaiming the space of social audits is very much about reclaiming the space of democracy and using instruments like social audits to build a public sphere that is genuinely deliberative, that genuinely aims to strengthen the practice of citizenship, through which a new and hopefully different democracy will evolve and emerge. There is no past that India can go back to, because that past itself was flawed, but there is a future that India can move towards, in which the core values of democracy remain fundamental. If one uses this as a starting point, then one can start getting to, I think, the questions that Keshav you posed, and that many of the presentations themselves were grappling with and are trying to articulate in different ways, which is the question of kaun karega, kaise hoga, un kin cheezon par social audit hogi. To my mind, the answer is not whether this can be invited, institutionally led, or otherwise. I think it is about building in the practice of deliberation into the processes through which people demand from the state. And that is fundamentally actually the role of civil society. Where did social audits come from? How did the social audit process become a movement? I remember in the early days of Narega, when the mega social audits used to take place in different parts of the country, often government participation, government invited those social audits, but this was a largely civil society led space and a civil society led form of mobilization. And I think it was through those civil society led spaces and mobilizations that organic institutional structures and frameworks for embedding social audits into government systems emerge. And we see very good examples of that. Karuna is here, Soumya is here as well. What used to be Andhra Pradesh, now the Telangana and Andhra Pradesh model, is a really good example. What Sampath was talking about in Meghalaya is another very good example. This is the coming together of civil society and government to arrive at creating some kind of institutional mechanisms. And in those institutional mechanisms, what matters is not so much what has been achieved in terms of the number of social audits or the reduction of corruption and so on and so forth, but the internalization within our social structures and within the way people engage with the state of the Jan Sunwais as part and parcel of a process. Just like for all its flaws, the Panchayati Raj system has ensured that local elections take place as part and parcel of our democratic structure. The articulation of a public sphere in which the process of Jan Sunwai can happen is, I think, itself the crucial achievement of these experiments that we have seen in some states. And the question is, therefore, how does one actually do this? I think the attempt at trying to do this through central government ministries or through top-down mechanisms of CMOs offices are always flawed. I think it works best through deeper mobilization of civil society organizations coming together in very difficult times today, where, as Amitabh pointed out, dissent and spaces for critique and protest have also reduced. But I think, in fact, therefore, social audits create an opportunity to reclaim that space, because one can begin a conversation by talking about basic fundamental rights of citizens, rights to good health, rights to good education, rights to a good road, rights to public works, and using that discourse of rights, embedding it into the grammar and language of our engagements with the state to push for deeper democracy. So I would urge that we move away from the questions of institutional structures and who and how, and really ask, how does one mobilize civil society across the board in ways by which we can restart the old movements for social audits at these mega levels that can infuse this idea back into the social lives of India at the grassroots level. I'll close by just adding one more point. We did talk a lot about COVID, and I saw that coming up in a couple of presentations. One of the big challenges that I think COVID presents to us is that of actually creating a legitimate space for the state to actually rid itself of people. I was quite taken aback recently. I haven't been traveling outside of Delhi very much, but I was quite taken aback recently when government reopened and we started going back to government meetings, how whether it's at the district level or the state secretariat or even Government of India offices, the halchal has gone. Log hi chale gaye hain. It has become legitimate now for government to make it as it is. It was hard because you had to get those slips, you had to go through security, you had to call 25 different offices, but there was always a throng of people. There is now a legitimate reason why government can prevent people from coming. And for all the warts of Indian democracy and the Indian state and its weak state capacity, the physical space of the state, the physical presence of the state always forced an interaction between state and citizens. When a pandemic becomes an excuse to curb those interactions, what are the different ways and means through which citizens can, in a physical way, claim from the state is a very crucial question that we should be asking ourselves and thinking about a lot harder. Certainly in urban areas, certainly in areas when you see peak COVID, which gives even more excuses for everybody to try and move the public away. The public has become much more of a problem than it has been in the past. And what that does then to the nature of our democracy and to the tools through which we have traditionally engaged and protested the state is a question that we must ask in the social audit process, because the social audit is fundamentally about the physicality of that space. It was in the Jan Sunwais when people would come and say, "Mera paisa inhone liya hai, abhi tak mere khate mein wo nahi aaya," that the field officer would start returning money. So what do we do in this new world to reclaim the physicality of that space? Keshav, I silenced you. You've muted.
Okay, thank you. That was a very neat presentation, and thank you for that very interesting observation on the post-COVID India. Karuna, Akella, if you've heard the other three discussants, could I now request you to address the meeting? Yeah, thank you. Madam, you're muted. You are muted, madam.
So I was just saying that I wish I had taken the first spot because such a grand kind of a framework has been set.
I did offer it to you.
Yes. I'm the small government servant who's sitting here where government is a bad word. And while Yamini says pandemic is created barriers between public and the government, I can assure Yamini that the public health system, of which I am the commissioner here, is bruised and stretched and doesn't know what to do with what is a health emergency, trying its best to cope. So with no sleep for so many months. So we are at this point really challenged in all kinds of ways. And now after all the three speakers have said what they have to say, I've headed social audits of the NREJS, and as a collector, I've done social audits of ration shops. Then I've done social accountability for the ICDS. Now I find a lot of merits, in the whole process of opening up the system. The underbelly of the system comes through. I think the biggest advantage and the biggest benefit is that on a common platform, that all the stakeholders come together and you're discussing a particular program, particular scheme, particular concept, and that is where all of us benefit. I think that one issue that I've had is the whole us and them, the citizen versus the government. I think that is why the kind of attraction that should be there for the social accountability is not there. Who's us and who's them? The government is all of us. I have been on both the sides. I think unless we start seeing that all spaces belong to all of us as citizens, and I say this in a very, very sincere way, it's not going to work as long as we say it's us and them. Wherever we have found common platforms where all this comes through, you see now what is the government? I can tell you from inside, government is no longer a concrete structure. It is very, very fluid, and not knowing what the next step are. This I'm saying as a bureaucrat. So when Sampath Garu was saying that you need to have a third party do the social audit, I don't think. I headed the social audit of Andhra for 3.5 years, and we were, toasted as the next best thing after the MKSs to have started and institutionalized the social audits. Now I find the third party has become another bureaucracy. There is no traction in the community after 15 years of regular social audits. There is no traction in the community. So I don't think it's the third party which should do. So I think Yamini was talking about it, Amitabh was talking about it. It is the community, the primary stakeholders at some point, they'll have to come together, not just to ask questions, but also participate in the whole process of governance. And I've worked a lot with the communities in self-help groups, etc. Wherever the community is participating, the whole governance gets better. So I think that we need to go back to the question of what is this whole social accountability about? Who's asking whom these questions? As long as you're going to look at us and them, I don't think the answers are there in any long-term kind of a way. So just coming back to health, because I've been asked to speak about health. Now, since I've done social audits of several kind of fields, the public distribution system or whatever, I think that is not a difficult thing at all. If you look at health, then you have this whole space of the primary healthcare where prevention and promotion is what is very, very important. Then you have the sub-center, you have the primary health center, then you have the health committees in the villages, then you have the hospital development societies. Then you begin asking simple questions like, is a doctor there? Are the medicines available? Are the timings being maintained? What are the, what is being done in malaria? What is being done in TB? What are the budgets? Then you start building there. The health committees can be empowered to ask these questions, which we did in the ICDS. And definitely there is a lot of good that comes out. I think in a system, in the current context, and then, okay, let me just complete that thread. So you come up, you have the first referral hospitals, you have the Rogi Arogya Samitis, you have the doctors, you have the timings, you have the clinical management. So it's very easy to understand what the entitlements are and what are the questions that have to be asked, and get a public platform and start asking these questions and hold the public servants accountable. So as far as the health and then in the pandemic now, I think what is very, very important is the community engagement, which all our doctors are now doing in a very big way to get them on board to be able to do the good behavior required for the control of the pandemic. So it has to be contextual. It has to be depending on the readiness of the community, depending on the awareness of where the community is today. Urban settings, it's different. Rural settings, it's different. Tribal area, it is different. It's a whole lot of things. So one needs to understand how these has to be worked out, and that's not difficult at all, either for any of us here who understand the grammar of governance, who understand how these dynamics work. So the only appeal I have to all the audience here, and we have all been engaging with each other on and off for a very long time. I just think that we need to not look at government as the enemy. We need to look at, maybe they are the enemy, I don't know, but unless we look at these spaces as ours, their spaces as ours, and our spaces as theirs, it's not going to go forward very much. So thank you. That's all I have to say for now.
Thank you. That was an extremely important observation you made, that all spaces are shared. They cannot be ours and theirs. I thank you for making that point. Good. We are almost 4, and I would now like to open up this discussion to all those who are participating. So I'm not sure who is in charge of the question box, but if it is whoever it is, will you start calling on some of our questioners, please? Or if you will share your questions with me, I can do it. But
So I think there's only one question in the question box, and that was me. But we can perhaps even go between panelists and presenters if they'd like another round, or if anyone would like to ask questions, please raise your hand.
Why don't you ask your question now, and then that may encourage some others to ask. And then if there are no questions, I will go back with some questions of my own to the discussants. But why don't you ask your question?
Sure. Actually, my question was responding to Yamini, and I think in a way, Karuna's intervention was along the same line, which is that Yamini suggested moving away from what is already an institutional and legal mandate for public oversight, and sort of handing things back to civil society. So my question is it about an either or is it about finding a balance between ensuring independence while situating oversight within institutions which have that legal mandate, which have been so hard? It's been a hard-earned legitimacy within the state in a way. So is this really the time to roll that back or move back? And is it about an either or?
Yamini?
So thanks for that question, Anindita. I should clarify that my point was not about moving away from a hard-fought institutional or legal mandate at all. My point was more in terms of how do you generate the institutional structures that would enable the most effective use of the legal mandate. And to my mind, that those institutional structures are not going to evolve through these, through the process of rulemaking or through top-down mechanisms, but will evolve through genuine partnerships. And I think that what happened in Andhra Pradesh, the social audit societies, and how that evolved, or for that matter, the social audit laws that have been legislated in Meghalaya, are examples of precisely that the ways in which to best draw on these legal mandates, to realize them in their true spirit, was through this coming together. And it is that coming together that actually always gets mobilized through deeper civil society activism and civil society action. And that's what I was calling for. So I was calling less for a sort of government of India mandating the creation of social audit societies or articulating all the rules of how a social audit has to be done, and for a much more organic civil society-led articulation of these relationships that could then evolve that would draw on the legal mandate to be able to conduct these social audits through genuine community engagement and participation. And I think that the point that Karuna was making about community ownership and genuine community participation, which is what actually leads to governance, is really at the heart of that struggle. And how does one build that rather than getting caught in a debate on the nuts and bolts of who should the social audit resource persons be? I think those things evolve in time, and different kinds of contexts will generate their own kinds of innovations to do these things.
Thank you. There was a question, Anindita, from someone called Kanika.
Yes. So if I could just read out the question that Kanika has shared in the chat. I think it's to all panelists because it was not referred to anyone in particular. What would be the mechanism checking on civil society itself? I'm sure we won't be able to handle a very far-fetched or extremely dominating vigilantism. So question.
Would anyone like to respond to that? Amitabh?
Yeah, sure. So as in just a couple of points, as in just also building on what Yamini said, I would want to challenge us a little further and say that while what Yamini said is correct and the question of balance is the most sensible approach, however, we are not at a political juncture where we can actually go ahead with that framework. If the sitting president of the oldest democracy says that he's won the election midway of counting, there is a fundamental problem where the democracy is getting defined. And at this moment, to have faith that these invited spaces can work, or structures which are created top down can actually be people centric, or let me also not say people centric, because I agree and respect the question that Kanika has, to be value centered, the values, the constitutional values that we're talking of is far-fetched. And we are seeing how institutions are getting subverted by the political regimes we have. So, Karunaji, I would completely agree that it's not a question. The government is certainly not a homogeneous entity. It is extremely heterogeneous, and it is certainly our space. But democracy is ultimately about contestation of power. And ultimately, democracy is about... Can I just complete?
Yes.
So democracy is also about popular control over regimes. And that will not happen in the current framework, is the point that at least I feel. And we are seeing that happening in every space. As in, if two elected chief ministers are kept under house arrest for more than a year, then there is a fundamental problem. And to, at this moment, say that this government is ours, it is certainly our government, but there has to be a solid political mobilization to make it accountable. That's the fundamental question. And that's where I strongly agree with Yamini that ultimately it is about building that political bulwark around the constitutional values that we're looking at. And Kanika, tough question. It is going to happen, that vigilantism will happen, but that's the battle. It is the battle for the soul of this country, I think, that we need to fight. This could be one way of doing it.
Karuna, you were saying something.
I agree with you on the mega picture, but what stops us in a particular village? Somebody does not have a land right, somebody does not have a PDS coming to him, somebody does not have a certain vaccination coming to him. While we engage in the larger debate and try to find the soul, as you say, the brick and mortar of what is happening on to day-to-day lives, especially in a situation like this, where so many people have lost their livelihoods. And let me tell you, government itself is clueless as to how to go forward. So I don't see why we should stop, our efforts at, restarting the whole social accountability. And there's so much of buzz, and everybody was talking about it during the NREJs. I don't see why that should stop. I think it should happen parallelly, because if it means that so many more people, so many thousands more, or even one person gets their entitlement of what they're supposed to get, in whose name the money is going, I don't see why we should stop that. That's what I'm saying. I don't think there's a conflict there.
Thank you. Yes, Yamini.
No, I agree. In fact, I think that with what Karuna was saying, in fact, I think that it is precisely in those mobilizations that we will slowly be able to recover and reclaim some of the foundations of our democracy that we are losing. And most importantly, I think it builds in a re-articulation of citizenship. But I do think that the way in which that can be achieved is through deeper civil society activism, rather than through trying to find frameworks through which the state can create that mobilization. I don't think that is possible. And I think that what we learned from Narega's experience, the early Narega experience, particularly highlights that. So I don't want us to lose sight of that in these debates. And I do think that somewhere if one reflects back on the 15-20 years, that what we ended up seeing in the struggle to institutionalize and scale, what we ended up seeing was a whole new sort of government grammar about social audits. There isn't a program, there isn't a law that deals with the grassroots state that doesn't embed within it this grammar of social audits. But its actual articulation and implementation got lost in that process. And also, I think it did a disservice to the idea of what it means for accountability within the state as well. In that it was, and I used to hear this, I've heard this very often, and I'm being provocative for a reason, because I think we should be pushing ourselves to think differently. But it does allow arms of the state to say, I am actually pushing the accountability function down below to somebody else. It's like, we are all open, we've made the whole system accountable, हमने social audit की प्रक्रिया डाल दी है, अब लोग अगर नहीं कर रहे हैं तो अब उन लोगों पे है. And that, I think, is it holds many of the kernels of the democratic atrophy and the institutional atrophy that we are confronting today, which I think can only go by through rebuilding more genuine grassroots political mobilizations around using instruments like social audits. So I would actually be quite comfortable if a political party wants to start doing social audits on the ground, even though it may lead to many of the vigilantism concerns that were brought up, because I think that a genuine new political practice is the only way in which some of the bigger issues that Amitabh you highlighted will be challenged.
Thank you. Any more questions? Would any of our presenters like to say something based on what they've heard from the discussants? Mr. Jeevan, Kumar, Mr. Biplab. I think Sulakshana has left, but she sent a message saying that her colleague is here. Someone called Megha has raised a hand.
Nilanjana, would you like to respond? I think Nilanjana is here.
Yeah, please.
Yeah. I think I agree with what Yamini said. And I think there was a lot of discussion, like obviously we couldn't sum it up in like the 8-minute time lot. But I think one of the important things is that there has to be some autonomy given to the body, whoever is doing the social audit. But we also do understand that it has finally come down to the people. It has to come down to the people, and there has to be solidarity and cohesion, and the movement has to grow from them, and the demand has to happen from them. So a lot of has also been discussed how pandemic, while giving us a lot of hurdles, and is a very crucial time to actually do this, because now people are probably realizing why health is an important topic. And while we have seen that around, I think 20 years ago, where there was not a lot being flagged about the health disparities or the kind of poor spending, like only 1.15% of GDP was being spent on health systems. But now finally media and other social media platforms are also kind of highlighting how there are patient rights violation happening. So there was a lot of talk about how there's also, the private sector here, and how a lot of times the government might even say, we are not probably responsible for them, but then they are also part of the health system, and then they also have to be brought into the accountability framework. So a lot of these things have been discussed, because health being a multi-layered issue. So yeah, I think a lot has been discussed.
Thank you.
We have one question from Megha, so I can just read that out. Megha asks that deeper civil society is riddled with its biases, and hence only a handful of people are interested in social audits. And this is because this service is not a part of our education system. So if the government doesn't educate or make people aware about social audits, how are they supposed to do them?
Who'd like to go on that? Yamini, you want to try that? Yeah, Amitabh does. Who does?
I can go.
Sampath wanted to respond to it.
I'm sorry, I thought he said he was going off to the assembly. Sampath Kumar, if you are there, please, we'd like to hear you.
In fact, that's a very good question. What we have experimented in educating self-help group women in using the social audits, and we found that was really, really, useful, and that actually brought a lot of discussion and the participation, what actually the other speakers have mentioned. I think the beautiful points. So, so one of this education is definitely is important. I think. So what I wanted to add one more point is that for the discussion that all the speakers have really put in, there is a I see there is a lot of hierarchy when the government the way that the government system that operates. So this hierarchy is like a very I would say it's a feudal hierarchy in many places. So when you have such a hierarchy, it's a how to disrupt that hierarchy. So you otherwise it's like a kind of a benevolent collector or the DM doing good is one thing, but are like a very proactive or a politician getting the access to the services is so. This particular social audit, actually, I see it disrupts that process. I think it that's why it requires a kind of a legal mandate. So yes, definitely, if it can, if you can, citizens can be mobilized, and definitely it can. It's a good option, but if it is a legal, there is a legal mandate like RTI. It's like a social audits like RTI plus. So RTI is what, like you get the information, but you don't know, like it's very difficult to access the services that actually one supposed to get from the government, which is been elected by them. I think that way the social audit I see is actually a very important mechanism. I think, of course, I think it has to be worked on both sides, from the government side, making it as a kind of legally, it should be the right to social audit should be brought into a framework, and a system has to be there, so that like people can get can access this social audits. In fact, there are some places like even the NREGA social audits are not allowed to be conducted. So we are so definitely this would be very useful where the governance is very bad. I think social audit definitely will improve the governance.
But if I can ask you a question, Sampath Kumar, I see the case you are making, but your colleague from government, Karuna from Telangana, spoke about the fact that the very impressive and very progressive structures put in place by the erstwhile government of Andhra Pradesh before bifurcation, she said that has become another bureaucracy now. So would you see the danger of that happening? I mean, your state has a law. I presume you are setting up certain bodies, structures within that. Do you see it going the same way?
Yeah, it definitely. That's where actually we have many laws. How actually again we need to really build that capacity. So actually, that's where a lot of education is required. A lot of civil society participation is required, so that they continuously they can access these services. So it's actually both ways. Definitely, I think what Karuna ji has said is a very important thing, because over a period of time, definitely that would come. And if it is a law, I think actually people can ask for it. Someone actually can knock the door of the court, saying that this is not being implemented, and why it's not being.
Yeah.
I just want to add something.
Yes, Karuna.
So Yamini, you were talking about the last 15 years. I think all of us have been associated with last 15 years of trying to institutionalize social audits and governments. And you're absolutely right. We've made limited progress in the whole accountability. But it's not as if there was a gag or stop order of the civil society to continue to do its work. To continue to do its work, which essentially all of us agree is the empowerment of the people, isn't it? So somewhere something, has not happened. So, it's not like 15 years the civil society said, don't do anything about, empowering the people. Somewhere I think all of us have failed our people, and we just need to understand government has failed, but all of us who feel so strongly about all of us, we have failed. And so, in getting them the basic things of what they're supposed. Today, 48% of our women go with anemia to the labor table, with 4, 5, whereas the minimum acceptable norm is 11. So somewhere, I don't know. So, yeah.
No, that is a very somber reflection. Yes. Anita, any questions?
So there's one question from Malini Chakravarti.
Please.
And the question is, social audit also requires budgetary support. Given that we are seeing massive budget cuts in various sectors, how does one advocate for budgets for social audits without it coming at the cost of spending on the social sector?
Yamini, do you want to go for that?
Sure. I mean, I think that this sort of reflects back to many of the battles that were fought and have continued to be fought over how to create the space for resources for social audits. The resources needed for social audits pale in comparison to the overall budget envelope of most programs. And there is a very clear logic to if a process can infuse better transparency and accountability, and therefore better improved quality of delivery to people, then there is a very, very strong reason why money should be spent on it. In fact, it's not coming at the cost of social service, of spending on social policy, as much as it's improving the ability of social policy money to be spent. And we know that there's government's absorption capacity, even in the best of times, is relatively low. We have large amounts of unspent balances. So there's money out there to be used, to be rested and to be used if there is a will to do so. I did want to just say that I think there's no question Karuna's somber reflection is absolutely right. There is nothing that's there is a we have collectively failed ourselves and our nation, and there was nothing that's there have never been either ors. There was nothing that stopped a process from stopped other parts of a process from continuing, even as a set of battles were being fought and continue to be fought, and that is a important cause of reflection. I think that the for me, as I've been sort of reflecting on social audits, and its relevance has sort of come back to me again and again in ways that that have pushed me to think about social audits very differently. I see in the social audit, as I said in my opening remarks, a crucial mechanism that can help us at least reclaim the democracy that we all hold so dear, in a way that I actually think that fundamental questions about what is it as a collective, what are we as a nation, what are the norms, and what is mutually acceptable for us as a society, and vis-a-vis the relationships we as a society want to forge with the state, are still in a process of evolution. And that process of evolution requires a deeper, more deliberative public sphere. And the social audit is certainly not the solution to our challenges of democracy, but it is certainly one important tool through which parts of that public sphere can be built, strengthened, and reclaimed. And I think that that's what I feel is worth fighting for in the social audits, and what needs to be preserved and hopefully expanded and strengthened in the social audits. And that's why I think the debate on social audits becomes today even more relevant. But its framework of discourse needs to also go back to where it started from, somewhere along the way. And somebody talked about social accountability tools having been appropriated across multiple stakeholders, and that's something we should be wary of. Certainly we should, because I think that somewhere along the way these began to be viewed as tools of efficiency rather than tools of democracy. And my framing is, or my appeal is, how do we bring back the narrative of democracy into the debates on social audits that we should and need to have.
Thank you. Anita, we have about 8 minutes left. So are there any questions, or should I try and summarize our discussion now? If there's one.
Yeah, I think you can go ahead and summarize where those are the questions for now.
All right. Well, thank you, all of you, those who made the presentations, the discussants, the questioners. Yeah, that was a very important and interesting discussion. And as I mean, like the best discussions do, that it doesn't really provide answers, but the fact that the questions are being raised, I think, is important. One thing is clear to me. I think there is agreement, certainly in this House. There is agreement that social audit is important, and our three thematic presentations are focused very clearly on the specific issues in each of those sectors, whether it was the health sector, the education sector, urban development. There was, I think, a very fine and detailed listing, again, telling us how complicated this whole process is, of the kind of questions that ought to be asked, the kind of detailed examination, the assumptions that need to be questioned, the way projections are made, and the way achievements are monitored, etc. I think that was useful. I hope that material that has been put together will also be circulated, etc. But there's one point I'd like to add to that, that all this becomes important if we can also ensure that, even assuming that those questions are actually being asked by some social audit team, it is even more important that those questions are being answered. I mean, it is only then that faith in the social audit process will be built. And several speakers have spoken about the fact that a vibrant and vigorous social audit system is only the base of building democratic structures. It's a way of exercising democratic practice, as it were. But that will become important and will begin to mean something only if there is some way in which we know that if a social audit team has found particular issues or difficulties with the implementation of a certain scheme, that whoever is concerned about that matter in government makes a response. And those states like Meghalaya, which have passed laws in the matter, I very much hope that that mechanism is also built into that same law, that any points raised by the social audit teams need to be appropriately responded to. Otherwise, there's no meaning to this exercise. We may be asking the correct questions, we may be highlighting correct problems correctly, but if no one is listening and there is no response, then the exercise is going to be a bit pointless. I think that is something we need to build into, whatever discussion we have on social audits needs to remember this, that this is a two-way process. Every audit needs a response, and I think that needs to be built in somewhere. I think all of us have agreed that the social audit is a process. It can be a very refined process. It can be a very detailed process, but at the end of the day, it is still only a process. It is feeding into a larger, into the much larger building of democracy, as it were, of reaching out to the democratic instincts of our people and refining them, honing them, telling them how they belong, even if they are not either, if they do not belong to the government or to a political party or do not hold elected office, still as citizens, how they can participate in the process. I think that is a very important point. But then we did have Amitabh's very, his warning earlier on that right now, there's also actually the larger question we have to ask is when the whole, as he put it, when the notion of accountability itself is the notion that that the people can hold an authority accountable, that notion itself is being challenged at every level in every possible way. I think we do have to ask ourselves this question of what happens to social audit within this process when every sort of process is which seeks to remedy the misuse of authority or the misuse of power or the wasteful expenditures. When every one of these is being questioned, what is going to happen to the social audit process itself? There was then the other very interesting point of where Karuna, Akella made this important point that all spaces belong to all of us, that there is no us and they and them. I'm not sure how much agreement there was on this. A lot of people in the field who are actually working in this area probably disagree and probably say that no, there is no sense of a shared space. I do see the attraction of believing in a shared space, but I really don't know enough of what is happening on the ground to know whether it's actually so. Indeed, it would be ideal if more people in government thought this way and recognized that these are shared spaces. Amitabh's distinction between invited and claimed spaces actually would vanish if we believed in the notion of a shared space. But that is I think, a much more difficult question. I'm not even sure whether we have the luxury of discussing that at this point of time. There was a very important point raised by Yamini on how, sadly, governments across the country are using the excuse of COVID to reduce even what limited interaction there was between government and the people. And even formal mechanisms, formal meetings, etc., are probably being either not held or held like we are speaking today on Zoom. And of course, lots of people don't have access to this sort of internet access. And that if this is happening, then actually it is tragic that that the pandemic should have resulted in this further limiting of the already limited space that we had created for government citizen interaction. There was one last point that I think it's a very, very important point that has come through this discussion, which is that I think it was Amitabh who first raised it, but others picked up on it, that at the end of the day, this is a political process. And we've been talking about Panchayati Raj institutions, we've been talking about government officials, we've been talking about community groups. We haven't talked about where and how do political parties come into this. What is their commitment to the notion of social audit? I mean, do they actually believe the right information? Do they believe in any of these things that are actually part of the law? And how do we then address that question? How do you get a belief in social audit as one of the building blocks towards building democratic process? How do you make that part of the political beliefs of of different people and the political parties themselves? That I think is a question to which I don't really have an answer, but it is a question that is to be asked, and which I'm fairly sure that we will reach an answer to through discussions of this kind. So that really is what I wanted to say. Thank you all very much for participating. It was extremely important and useful. And Anindita, thank you again for asking me, and I return the mic to you. Thank you very much. Thank you all. Bye all. Bye, Amitabh.